10 years ago today, I was inducted into the Lucchese crime family, and I'm going to go over some of the events that took place on that day. On April 2nd, 2013, the weather was nice and the sun was out. As days go, this wasn't just an ordinary day. In the street, this day represented the highest honor because I was about to be inducted into a family. Looking back on it now, it actually signifies the lowest point in my life. A proposed member is not supposed to know he's going to a secret ceremony, but we all do. About a week prior, I was having a drink at the bar in Zio Toto. Johnny Sideburns walked in and pulled me to the side. He smiled and told me, "Stay out of trouble for the next week." I knew what he meant. Both Anthony Guzzo and I were going to be made. On the same day that Sideburns told me to stay out of trouble, I took a ride to Anthony's house. He wasn't in a good mood when I seen him and was getting cold feet. He changed his mind and said that he didn't want to be inducted. And after talking with him for a while, I was able to convince him to change his mind. Thinking back on it now, I wish I never would have done that, and I know Anthony feels the same. On the morning of April 2nd, I woke up, showered, and shaved, and then my phone rang. It was Anthony. He wanted to know what I was going to wear. I told him not to wear a suit, that guys don't get dressed anymore. He said, "Good thing you told me I was wearing a suit." I said, "No, you'll look stupid." When we hung up the phone, I walked over to my closet. I took out a navy blue suit, and I was laughing as I put it on. I drove to Howard Beach to Joey DiBenedetto's house, and we jumped in his truck and started driving to Staten Island. On the way, I told him what I did to Anthony, and we were laughing. We were going to pick Anthony up first when we got to Staten Island. When we pulled up by his house, Anthony was outside in slacks and a sweater. When I got out to greet him, he took one look at me and said, "You're an asshole." I told him he had time to change, but he didn't want to. We were all starving, so we went to Z2 to have breakfast. Big John's brother Spanky met us there, and we all piled in his car, which had a guy named Patty, who was with Joe Cafe and also being inducted that day. Anthony and I squeezed in the back seat with Patty, which made it crowded and uncomfortable. At the time, Patty had a leg injury and had to stretch his leg out. Spanky drove on the Korean War Veterans Parkway and began jumping on and off exits. In case we had a law enforcement tail, he would lose them. We pulled up to a house that I know belonged to Stevie the Jew, a bookmaker who was around Frankie Bones Papani and also partners with Big John in the cigar lounge. Naturally, Steve and his family were not allowed to be home. Big John came out to greet us with a shit-eating grin on his face. That day, he was permitted to have two guys straightened out. And since Joe Cafe only had one, he loved it because he enjoyed one-upping Cafe. We went into a house and was led into a basement that had 3 chairs. I took a seat and so did Anthony and Patty. I could hear people moving around the house above us. And after a minute or two, the door opened and Spanky called out Patty's name. I laughed internally. I wasn't sure if Big John knew that who they called first had significance. By calling Patty first, they were showing respect to Joe Cafe. But most likely, Big John didn't see the principle behind that. As we were sitting there, I noticed in front of us was a long red plastic bag that I quickly realized was a Christmas tree bag. I looked over at Anthony, who didn't look too good, and he was staring at the bag. He looked at me and said, "What the fuck is that?" I kept a straight face and said, "I don't know." And I think I said something like, "I don't like it." I was hoping that they would call Anthony next, because if he was left alone in that basement, he was going to have a heart attack. Just then, the door opened up and Spanky called my name. As I was walking up the stairs, I was going to tell him what the bag was, but I decided to let him sweat it out. I was led into the dining room, which held a long table, and a bunch of guys from the Lucchese family was sitting around it. Matty Madonna sat at the head of the table, and there was an empty seat next to him, which I took. And to my left sat Big John. On the table in front of Matty was a gun and a knife. And the first thing that Matty asked me is if I knew why I was there. Even if you know why you're there, you could never admit that you do. So I told him no. He then announced that they were the Lucchese crime family and that they wanted me to become a member. Matty conducted the ceremony, to my surprise, with gracefulness and eloquence. Matty was usually very loud when he spoke, but not on this day. After a series of questions, the time came to draw blood from my trigger finger, which, by the way, Matty asked which one it was. I held my finger out to Big John, who, like the big kid that he was, took a diabetic needle and almost put it through my finger. After Matty finished with me, Spanky called out for Anthony to come up. And when he walked into the room, he looked pale like he was going to pass out. Matty was concerned about a window that was next to the door, so they had me and Spanky stand behind Anthony's chair. Just in case somebody looked in, they wouldn't be able to see what we were doing. After Anthony sat down, he turned around and looked up at me, and his face said it all. Anthony's father was killed by the Colombos, and I think he felt the same thing was about to happen to him. But I just looked down at him expressionless. I watched as Matty went through the same exact ceremony with Anthony, and as time went by, and Anthony realized he wasn't going to be killed, the color returned to his face. With the ceremonies over, we all locked arms around the table while Maddie spoke in Italian. This act signifies that we were one, or at least we were supposed to be. There have been people, mostly people who would never be considered to be inducted, who have said that I was a mistake or that the Lucchese family made a mistake with me. In that life, it's a family that picks you, not the other way around. But I'll agree with it being a mistake. No one should accept being a part of anything that's based on disloyalty, selfishness, and treachery, and especially something that doesn't follow its own rules. So it was a major mistake. I definitely didn't belong with these people. In the kitchen, they had sandwiches and wine for us. And Maddie, Anthony, Patty, and myself were sitting at a table drinking wine. Maddie turned to us and said, "This is what we need. Good young blood." The guy Patty's face got red. He told Maddie that he was in his 60s. Maddie just looked at him and said, "Sorry." I almost spit the wine out of my mouth and had to hold my laughter in. Anthony and I laughed about it later. When we left Staten Island, Joey, Anthony, and I drove to the Pearl Room in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which was Anthony's wife's restaurant. We were having drinks at the bar, and at one point, Anthony leaned over to me and whispered in my ear, "What are you, a wise guy?" I hope you enjoyed this video. And if there's any associates out there or anybody looking to get involved with the mob listening to this right now, I have one message for you. Don't do it. Happy Palm Sunday and enjoy your day.